I'm unbelievably honored today to have Dr. John Sorensen with us, the President and CEO of Evangelism Explosion, and this huge ministry. You know, I went through the program back in the 70s. Karen and I did. And marked our lives, you know. We listened to Dr. James Kennedy every Sunday morning before we went to church. I often said, if he just spoke nursery rhymes, I would be spellbound. You know, he had this great voice, didn't he?
Yeah,
Oh, my goodness.
He was unbelievably used by God to preach His word, not only here, but around the world.
Yeah.
You know, I was always amazed. I'd go to a businessman's lunch or breakfast in Egypt, and the common thread in that whole group was that they watched D. James Kennedy
Is that right?
every Sunday. Yeah, it was really amazing, the impact that he had.
Wow.
You know, that's one of the things I think is one of the benefits, blessings of EE is it's used in about 400 different denominations worldwide. And so it really...
And just to be clear, when we say EE, we're talking about Evangelism Explosion,
right.
One of, if not the largest evangelistic program in the world.
In the world, yeah.
It's just,
even to
how
this day.
How many staffers and employees you have?
We're just under 2,000 full-time employees worldwide.
That's a few more than we have here at ROTW.
We have about 400,000 volunteers that are engaged in the process of equipping and training people. So it's a pretty good-sized ministry.
Yeah, but as long as we're on that subject, talk about the people you're reaching. I mean, the numbers are more than mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people are you reaching, and how many conversions are we getting?
Yeah, this past year, just in this past 12 months, that was last year, 2013, we had 7.944 million people who made a profession of faith during one of our training events. Otherwise, there's no way that we would count it or calculate it. You know, I meet people all the time. I speak at a conference, and I get a line of people who come up to me that say, what you said, I was trained 40 years ago. I'm still leading folks to Christ. I just led my neighbor to Christ. Well, we don't have any way of calculating that number.
Yeah.
There's no way that appears. Yeah. But just within the training events that we're doing, 7.9 million people last year. We believe we're going to hit, by the grace of God, 9 million this year. Now, it's still a little early for that, but we believe it will happen.
And that's a conservative number.
Very conservative
Number. The wonderful thing about encouraging people to start sharing their faith, I call it the ultimate pyramid marketing scheme, you know? I mean, you get one person on fire sharing their faith.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people are they going to affect in their lifetime? In our business, in the car wax, it's a lifetime value. You get somebody in your products, how many bottles of car wax they're going to buy for their life, you know? Or in this case, how many people will they lead to the Lord? You know, the gentleman really turned me on to sharing faith. When I get to heaven, I'm going to go and find him. Would you share, before we turn on the cameras, you mentioned, you quoted Dr. Kennedy and saying something about, or maybe it was somebody else, who he uses greatly, he wounds.
Yeah. Actually, that was what Dr. Kennedy said to me. He said,
"Give me that." That's and I said, "I got to ask that again." I don't know if I heard it right, but it sounds
well. Here's what he said.
Amazing.
Regular, you know, Dr. Kennedy. Many people didn't realize, but he was in pain every day. You know, in fact, his whole back was fused. I don't know if you ever saw him. He couldn't really. You know, his neck was.
Was
fused.
that from all the dancing years? He danced too hard in the early years.
I don't know what caused it, but he was in pain constantly.
He was it Arthur Murray or whatever before he got saved?
Arthur Murray,
he was a great
dance instructor. And you know, he never really did walk. He just glided.
Yeah.
I mean, he just would glide everywhere that he would go. And he was a very poetic person.
An elegant man.
Yeah. And a statesman, if ever you'd use that word, you'd use it about Dr. Kennedy. And but he said this to me. He said, when we were talking about hurt and we were talking about hard things that come, you know, my wife has had some great struggles physically as well. And here's what he said. He said, God will never use anyone greatly that he will not wound deeply. And so the more deeply you are wounded, the more greatly God can use you. And, you know, you think about these folks that go through their life without ever a care, ever a concern, or ever a tragedy. And if that's the case, you know, he said, and this was in the same context, he was saying this, we were talking about these young men who had just died. And, you know, and it wounded the congregation, and that's one of the why he was making the comment he was. These were young men; they were leaders in the church. People said, "What tragedy that these young men would die at the heart of their." And he said, "John, tragedy isn't when young men die at young. He said, tragedy is when old men live old lives and never do anything for God. That's tragic." That's tragic.
Thank you, John. We'll hold on that point for just the moment, and we'll be back with more of Dr. John Sorensen in another segment.